Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are watching Off the Track, and it is time to drop the hammer.
Well, racing season is kicking into high gear. We are getting ready to leave for the 39th running of Ohio Speed Week. We are shooting this actually the night before we are leaving. It's going to drop on this Wednesday. This is episode number 22 of Off the Track. Welcome back to today's show. Like I said, racing season is kicking into high gear, and we're glad to be back for another Wednesday's episode. I'm your host, Tanner Holmes, and to my left, I have my best friend and co-host, Bennett Gooch. Bennett, man, how's life been lately?
Dude, it's been awesome. I've been up here for the past race weekend, and we ended up winning that, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this episode. And also, it's a classic 10:30 p.m. We're leaving, I think, at 5 a.m. tomorrow, so I'm pumped up. And I know me and you are probably going to struggle to sleep tonight because we're so excited to go. But, this episode is a pretty cool episode, and I was really looking forward to this one as well.
Yeah, we're pumped to drop it. Today, we actually got the chance to interview the voice of the All-Star Circuit of Champions, the announcer, Blake Anderson. And I had actually just became friends on Facebook with Blake, and I was thinking, like, man, who could we interview? Especially we try to line stuff up with maybe some of the events. And when we decided we wanted to run Ohio Speed Week, it kind of clicked, like Ohio Speed Week, All-Stars, kind of the series combined, and then the announcer. And I was like, hey, we became friends. Maybe I should send him a message. And sure enough, he was super cool, wanted to come on the show. And a few days later, we actually shot this interview. So we actually shot this a couple weeks ago down in California. It was actually at your mom's work. What's the name of the company?
George Peterson Insurance. So the whole reason we did that is because I had vehicle issues. You coming down had a little vehicle issues. But big thank you to Bob there for allowing us to use one of his rooms. Great Wi-Fi, and it was an awesome interview, actually.
Yeah, so like I said, Blake Anderson, the voice of the All-Stars, and we were able to line this up because we are heading to Ohio Speed Week. So we chat with him for about 35 minutes. We mainly talk about his story, how he got to the spot he is as now, the announcer of one of the top 410 series in the country, and just what the journey was like to get there. Because, we've interviewed different racers and talked to them about their story on, maybe how they got in a top tier ride. And it was interesting to hear this different perspective on just a completely different job in motorsports, not necessarily behind the wheel, but, being behind the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always kind of funny to me, and how, even on the Dale Jr. download, listening to interviews, how some people kind of fall into positions. And I'm not saying Blake necessarily fell into it, but it was kind of one of those things where I think it was his dad promoting him to do his very first announcing thing, which you'll hear in the podcast. But I think it's just funny how these guys that are so professional now kind of just almost fell into their positions, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it also took years and years of grinding and not giving up. And that's really a lot of people's stories in motorsports. Things don't just happen fast nowadays. It's very rare that you hear a story of someone just, getting a quick job and, being at the top of the game. It takes years and years and dedication and perfecting their craft, and then all that hard work eventually pays off. So
100%.
We're going to dive right into this interview with Blake Anderson. We will talk after a little bit about Ohio Speed Week and what the next couple of weeks look like. Let's get into it. So joining us here today on episode number 21 of Off the Track, we have the voice of the All-Star Circuit of Champions, one of the premier 410 series in the United States. It's Blake Anderson. Blake, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm excited.
One of the main things to kind of jump into, the All-Stars just got done with their Indiana invasion, kind of something that was maybe a little bit experimental. They haven't done it really before. A lot of bull rings, a lot of good short track racing. Can you just kind of talk about how those 4 days went? Because it really seemed like a success from watching on Flow.
Yeah, wing racing is something we're certainly trying to grow in the state of Indiana. Primarily when you think of Indiana, you think non-wing sprint cars, which it really is. There's not a lot of wings out here, but over the course of the last probably 3 or 4 years, we've really started to see that transition from non-wing teams to now the non-wing teams are starting to run with wings, which is pretty exciting. I mean, if you look at our Indiana All-Star Invasion champion was Tyler Courtney, a guy that is a USAC sprint car champion and midget champion, and a team that was non-wing sprint car racing for the last couple of years is now wing racing. And Justin Peck's from Indiana, he's second in points. The team third in points, Sam McGee Motorsports, finished second in the USAC National Sprint Car points 3 years ago. Now the last 2 years, this is their third season with us. They're in the mix for a championship as well. So we're starting to see that change, and we're really trying to get the crowds on it. We got a lot of people asking for wing racing out here, and now it's just trying to get people out to the racetrack and support it. And we gained some traction through the week and had great audiences watching on Flow, and now we've got a brand new racetrack in Indianapolis that literally we opened up with on Thursday at Circle City. That was their first ever race, so that was pretty exciting as well.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask you about. I was a little skeptical halfway through the night at Circle City, but that was actually a great race both nights, and I think you saw the highlights as well. That was a really awesome race.
Yeah, I was. I'll admit it. I was a little skeptical. I mean, we got through heat races and it was kind of just bumper cars around the bottom. And I talked to a lot of drivers before the dash draw off the mic, and that was kind of the consensus of, man, this dash draw is going to be huge because we're just playing bumper cars on the bottom, and it's going to be who can you move? And I'm not sure if it's banked enough or if there's enough grip up on the high side. And to the credit of Scott Petrie and gang at Circle City that works on the racetrack, they busted their tails and they're learning as well. I mean, that was the first night of racing, and they kind of missed the high side, and then we got to the feature and it was like a complete different racetrack, and it made for phenomenal racing, which I think from my perspective is interesting to watch the tune of people on social media change from heat races in the dash to by the end of the night people are like, wow, that was awesome. And I was one of them. I left thinking, I think they've got something here at Circle City. We're on to something. So, and night two was great as well. So that was certainly encouraging. And I think hopefully they can gain some traction because that's a track in Indiana that's going all in on wing racing. They're going to have like 5 Thursday night wing races, and they've got a $21,000 to win wing race in October.
That was cool. Yeah, I totally agree with you.
That's neat. Yeah, it's awesome to see, the larger payouts, and it just, makes it, more worthwhile for all these big 410 teams that are trying to tour. One of my next questions, at the end of that 4 nights, we saw Zeb Wise pick up his first win. There's also been a couple of other first-time winners this season with the All-Stars. You've been a part of the series for a while now. How special is it for you to kind of be a part of that moment? One of the first people to talk with them and get that emotional interview, and like in Zeb's case, getting the monkey off his back and getting that first 410 win, which also, paid $26,000.
I think that's probably one of my favorite things of getting to be the voice of the All-Stars, a series that has so much history dating back to 1970. It was probably, it is one of the original touring ring sprint car series, and especially with 410s, and that is pretty special. I mean, I can remember a lot of the first-time winners. I remember doing Carson Macedo at Lincoln Speedway. One of my best friends was BC, and doing his first All-Star win at Sharon Speedway during Speed Week in 2016. And then I've known Tyler Courtney for 11 years now, from back when I lived with Brian. Tyler was sweeping the shop at that time Brian Clausen Incorporated, just hoping he can get a shot eventually. And now he's one of the better wing drivers in the world and got his first wing win a couple of weeks ago. And then Zeb, who I've known for 5 or 6 years now, who's kind of been that guy that we've all been watching for a while, knowing it's going to come, and he finally got his win, and his was certainly emotional. I mean, there were tears in victory lane from the family, and they rolled the dice and started their own family team this year with Wayne and Stacy Pretty as well. So that was pretty neat, and $26,000 on the line certainly makes it a little bit more special.
That's cool.
So kind of talking about, the beginning of the season there, the Indiana invasion and all that, but so much I feel like has probably went in because of, everything that kind of took place in 2020. What kind of went into planning this 2021 season as we kind of try to get back to normal for the All-Stars, and also, having these larger races with more payouts, to make it worthwhile for the 410 teams that are touring, starting down in Florida, and now, it's really starting to get kind of into high gear with some speed weeks coming up and a lot of, big weekends.
Yeah, I look at, we kind of maybe, I don't know, changed the way we scheduled things this year because of last year. I mean, last year we had to get creative with the pandemic and really chase our tails, especially in July or June when we went out and ran Oklahoma and Texas, which is certainly out of our scheduling region. And we found success there, had huge crowds, and looked to get back there this year. We just couldn't find a gap that made sense to get back there this year with scheduling with ASCS and the Outlaws, and it's not fair for the racetracks for us to go there and us to schedule on top of something and get 13 cars. No one wants that. We don't want that. The fans don't want that. So, and we didn't want to step on toes either. So that's certainly something we're looking at doing in the future, is getting back out there because of the success we had. And I know the race fans out there are maybe frustrated we didn't get back there, but it wasn't possible without ruffling feathers and stepping on toes, and we didn't want to do that. But money-wise this year, we kind of changed the motto and almost went to money talks. If you want a big all-star race, then let's book a big all-star race. If you want a premier weekend, then we need to pay money, and that's where we were at for Memorial Day weekend with the Bob Weichert. Like, we traditionally race for $5,000-6,000 on Memorial Day weekend, and when they came knocking at the door and said, "Hey, let's do 10 grand at Williams Grove, 10 grand at Port to open the Bob Weichert Memorial, and 29 grand," that's hard to say no to, and especially at Port Royal, they've been such great supporters of our series, and Steve O'Neill and gang are great to work with. And talking with you guys talked about Port a little bit off the mic. It's awesome at Port, so it's hard to say no to go to Port Royal, and that was kind of what we changed this year. Is we needed to get big events on our schedule to continue to attract top tier teams. And not that we're trying to pull teams from the Outlaws, but give these big teams a decision to make on what they wanted to do. And that's really our conscious, an effort and our focus moving forward in years to come is continuing to put higher paying races on our schedule and stay right about where we are at 55 to 60 races, but make 55 to 60 big events.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about having these big money shows on the schedule. Do you personally have a big money show that you look forward to announcing every year?
Oh man, Tusky 50. I mean, that's 54 grand to win goes up. I mean, that's hard not to love that race. And now
Yeah.
it's 4 nights, or 3 nights, excuse me, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So that's pretty cool. The Race Rudine Foundation race is special to me because I've really gotten to know the Rudine family the past couple of years, and they work with the series. But that's awesome. I mean, I get to work the King's Royal, and that is special because Eldora, now that have worked for Tony for 7 years now, Eldora's almost become my home track. When I moved from Iowa after I graduated, I mean, I grew up 20 minutes from Knoxville, so Knoxville's home for me. I announced the Knoxville Nationals for 5 years when I was in college. So now I just get to go be a race fan there, which I honestly enjoy because I can go drink beer with my buddies and hang out and get to be a race fan all week. So that's hard to beat. But Kings Royal is probably right up there because I get to pit report and I'm out of my element in the booth, and it's difficult and it's different, and I like that challenge. But
That's cool.
and then Chili
That's
Bowl,
great to
obviously,
hear.
Chili Bowl.
And really see, the progress of the All-Stars and also, just everything you guys have been up to lately. The next segment we want to get into, where did all this racing start for you? I've kind of, in some of our research, we found you don't have maybe, a huge background in racing, or your family does. So like, where did this interest get started, potentially also, pursuing a job announcing, some of the biggest races?
So we'll rewind the clock back. I grew up in central Iowa, 20 minutes from Knoxville, but I grew up going to a track called Boone Speedway, which is the IMCA Super Nationals. You guys know IMCA Modifieds quite well. They race in Oregon. But that's the home of the Super Nationals. I grew up going there every Saturday night, about an hour from home. My dad is from Boone, Iowa. He was actually at the very first race at Boone Speedway in the late 60s, and that's where we spent Saturday nights. And in high school, or late middle school, I started calling some baseball games as one of my teachers like, "Why don't you try this announcing stuff? You like to talk." I was always in trouble for talking. So that's how that started. And going to Boone on Saturdays, they had an announcement opening, and basically my dad kind of forced me into it. It's like, you're going to at least try this. We're not driving up here an hour, and you're not going to not try this. So at 15 years old, I started calling. At that time, it was dwarf cars. Now they've kind of changed into mod lights, but it was dwarf cars and 4 cylinders on Saturday nights at Boone Speedway, and they had me back the next year. And then the following year, when I was a junior in high school, I started to get to call some races at other tracks around Central Iowa, the State Fairgrounds in Des Moines and Stewart Speedway, and a little bit at Marshalltown. And I always grew up going to Marshalltown on Fridays as well. And then when I was right at my freshman year of college, so the fall of '08, Knoxville had an opening. Justin Zock was retiring, and Tony Bachhoven, who is the voice of Knoxville Raceway, really was pretty instrumental in me getting that job. He really pushed for me to get that job, and Tony and I became pretty close, and I worked with Tony for 5 years at Knoxville Raceway and learned a lot from Tony. But my announcing style really comes from the guys that I learned how to announce from, Toby Cruz and Denny Grabenbauer. I can still hear Denny Grabenbauer behind me on Saturday nights at Boone Speedway. Like, this is before broadcast, so I mean, this is before people could hear you. It was keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. I can still hear him behind me, and that paid dividends because now, I mean, every race we have is on a broadcast. So I announced at Knoxville in 2011. I got a chance to work for USAC when I was in college, an internship. So I moved to Indianapolis for a summer and lived with BC. In 2013, I graduated from the University of Northern Iowa with a communications degree. Thought I wanted to work in news, be a sports guy, do sports for a local news station. Interned at a TV station through college, and I graduated and wanted to work in racing, and lucky my parents are like, you know what, you're not going to get a job working in racing living in Des Moines, Iowa. So they moved me to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I tried to find a job in racing and tried to find a job in racing and met people and networked. And I was down there for almost a year before I got my first job. And honestly, that was probably, I've never been depressed, but that was probably as close as I've ever been because it just kind of got like, man, I can't get a job. I'm worthless. Ended up getting a job at World Racing Group that owns the Outlaws, but I wasn't even announcing. I was maybe calling 10 races a year. USAC would bring me in, or Roger Slack at Eldora a couple times a year, and I ended up getting a job in marketing at World Racing Group, sitting in the office. So I would go to, when I went to races, it was to help hang banners and do marketing activation. And then I'd sit and listen to the announcers, listen to Johnny Gibson or Rick Eshelman or Ben Shelton, who was calling the Outlaws at that time. Tony buys the All Stars in 2015, and I can take you to exactly where I was sitting when I got this call. Roger Slack from Eldora calls me out. My parents are moving to Kenosha, Racine, Wisconsin. My dad had just taken a new job, and we were going to the Big Ten tournament to watch the Iowa Hawkeyes play, my Iowa Hawkeyes. And they're like, well, we need to go house hunt this day. So we're sitting in the house. My parents ended up buying, and Roger calls me, and it was one of those, like, you just know, man, this is something. Roger calls me a lot, but I don't know why. I just had that feeling. And I'm not saying, honest to God, I was like, I stepped out the front door and talked with Roger and Pace. He's like, hey, Tony bought this series. You work in marketing. We need a guy that can do marketing and announce. You need to interview. So I flew back to Charlotte later that week and met with my now boss, Jared Fruit, a couple of times. And here we are 7 seasons later, 6.5 years later, and still announcing for the All-Stars. I'll be honest, when I took the job, I thought, I'll do it for 2 or 3 years and I'll move on. I want to be back down in Charlotte, but I've really grown to love it, and we've busted our tails to get the All-Stars to where they are. So that's kind of the elongated story, if that fills in some gas for you.
That's a great story there. And you mentioned when you went to Charlotte, North Carolina, and you talk about, looking for a job, did you specifically know, was your mind maybe in the route to go to NASCAR and not the dirt side of things? Because that's where everyone, you go to Charlotte for NASCAR.
It absolutely was. I thought I want to do some PR stuff and some marketing stuff. So I met with a lot of race teams and had great friends that would get me some meetings. I mean, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was very big about helping me get meetings with all these teams. And I'd go in and sit down in interviews with these teams, and every single one of them were like, well, we need you to get 2 years experience. I'm like, well, this is an entry-level job. What do you want me to do here? I don't have 2 years experience, but you're only going to pay me pennies, and this is the entry-level job. I'm like, what do I do? So I basically got to the point where I was like, man, I'm going to have to do an internship again and not make money and just try to get something where I can work for a team for 3 months for free and maybe lead that into something. And World Racing Group had an opening, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to apply for it. I knew some people over there because I had done World Finals for them for a couple years and Dirt Car Nationals, and they knew me from Knoxville. So they actually, the day I went into interview, they had someone flown in that day that was interviewing that they basically thought was going to hire. And basically, I got this interview because Brian Dunlap was like, give him a shot, and somehow I threw the slide job of the century, as Dunlap said, and they ended up hiring me. But then I went down there thinking, I'm going to work in NASCAR, and that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Dirt track racing. I'll just be a dirt track fan.
That's cool.
That's phenomenal. So kind of going through like all those steps you just talked about, and I guess it all depends on the type of person you are, but like were you, as you kind of get opportunities, is that like a nerve-wracking thing? Because like, for racers, as we try to move up through the ranks, maybe we get an opportunity in someone's car for the night or whatever, like it's all nerve-wracking as you kind of take that next step. For you, like how kind of was that, taking those opportunities and then, maybe working with people that you look up to or, you're trying to get a job from?
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking. I can remember my first night at Knoxville. It was 12 years ago, 2 weeks ago. So it was right around, I think, May 9th, May 10th. The Outlaws rained out, so we had a ton of Outlaw teams there. ASCS rained out, so we had like 83 60s there. So I'm already just sweating bullets, nervous. I mean, my head's just pounding out the wall. I can still remember Tony Bachhoven leaning over to me and telling me, man, just breathe, relax. You're going to be fine. Just turn the mic on and go. And it is one of those things where once you get going, you kind of relax. But yeah, as you take steps and get bigger opportunities, it is nervous. And I'll admit, I still get nervous, especially at the big events. I mean, I get nervous, but I'm sure you, Tanner, you can relate. You get in the car and it fires off and you get locked in. And I get that same way with the mic. I get the mic on and the outside noise gets a little bit more quiet.
That's incredible. That really is cool to hear that story. Kind of transition into the next part. Now you've made it. You're the all-star announcer. You're the voice of the series, and we hear you during every broadcast, announcing all the regulars and whatnot. What's kind of a normal night at the racetrack for you? If nothing goes wrong, I know, really being at a high spot in a series, sometimes you do have those catastrophes or stuff at the racetrack. But when everything's kind of going right, from start to finish, kind of what's a normal night look like for you?
A normal night, they're hectic. I mean, try to get there between 1:30, 2 o'clock. Eric, sometimes the series director, Eric, he gets frustrated. I get there too. I like to push his buttons. But Eric had took over our series a couple years ago, and he's great to be around. So we don't mind being around there early because he's fun to be around. So 1:30, 2 o'clock, get there, and I try to have at least a start on my notes. At least our 12 guys that are running full time have some notes done on them, and maybe some guys I expect to be there. But I also we run off My Race Pass and the My Race Pass app. So I'm entering our entry list on there, and then I have a notes page where I keep track of hey, Bennett's run his 19th, this tonight's his 19th career All-Star race, and Tanner's made 12 A mains with the All-Stars. And then I got a sponsor page, and if they're new, I got to enter their sponsors in hometown. So I'm doing that and trying to keep notes up. And then Aaron, that's doing more of our social media with pictures on nights. I make sure that I've got her some stats on some guys, so she can go out and take some pictures and say, hey, Tyler Courtney's won 3 of the last 4 races. He's never run at this track before at the wing, or some fun facts on our guys. And then we have our drivers meeting, and once our drivers meeting's in, that's when I usually change into what I'm wearing for the night. And drivers meeting happens, and I'll go up to the booth. And once I get up to the booth, I got to enter my transponder numbers. So live timing and scoring works on the app and through the website, and enter the lineups, make sure my ducks are in a row, pull up my PA reads, and I start my PA reads once we get the broadcast going. And I have a little monitor that's, I don't know, yay big from Flow that sits just off to my left usually, so I can see when the broadcasts go live. So once the broadcast goes live, that's when I start my PA reads. So it hits our sponsors that are watching on the broadcast as well, so we can get both. So that's been an adjustment that I've had to make from where we were 6 years ago, say. But once the races get going, it's basically getting my lineups, entering my lineups online, making sure that I've got my 9,000 papers in line, and then you get in your zone. And I kind of have my mess of a system that works for me that may not work for another guy, but it works for me. But I've really kind of modeled it off Johnny Gibson. I see how efficient he is on race night, and Johnny and I are good friends, and I talk to him quite a bit, and he's the man. I mean, Johnny Gibson is the greatest sprint car racer announcer of all time. I mean, he's the voice of sprint car racing, and I'm lucky that I get to lean on him, and we go back and forth on stats. But that's kind of a night. And then at the end of the night, get back up to the booth after victory lane and post the finish to the website, update the points for the website, shut the laptop down, maybe help Ross, who scores for us, carry the scoring box down. Or if I can get down to the pits at decent time, I'll capture an interview for Flow to post on the app, interview or two. But sometimes it gets a little hectic. But that's kind of maybe a perfect night, I guess, is right there. But as you guys know, that doesn't always go perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. I didn't realize so much goes into it each night. Something I also want to mention that you sometimes often get the opportunity to do is your pit walks. I just wanted to commend you for that, because those are fun to see, walking through to see who is there and what each team is doing, and your interviews with some of the drivers on the night prior. Those are cool.
Yeah, I try. That's something that, I mean, it's easier for me to do my pit walks now in the next couple of weeks, because when we're getting the new drivers that haven't raced with us, it's a lot to get everything entered into the system. But now that, we're only getting maybe 3 or 4 drivers that haven't run with us yet this year, it's a little bit easier for me to slide away for 15 minutes and be able to, not only just walk the pits, but stop and talk with people, rather than most of the time I try to circle the pits and see what I can find out off of a pit walk, not doing a pit walk and just find something to talk about. But I enjoy doing the pit walks and interacting with the people that hop on Facebook Live. And you're right, Bennett. That's kind of the purpose of the pit walk, is to show the people, more so sell the people at home, that if they're close enough to driving distance, hey, hop in your car because driver X is here. Or if you're watching, then, hey, man, I want to watch the All Stars tonight because that place looks sweet, or that driver's here and that's who I want to watch.
Yeah, I've definitely been one of those people on the Facebook Live watching those before as well.
Another thing that we wanted to ask you, and this could be considered a challenge, or maybe for some people announcing it isn't, but sometimes you have to announce with another person in the booth. How kind of tough is that to get there? Because you kind of have your rhythm, like you talked about throughout the night. I'm sure once you get going, you're just in the zone. But working with someone else, how difficult can that maybe be to kind of figure out their rhythm to where you guys are kind of just going back and forth, throughout the night?
It's difficult at first. It certainly, especially if you've never done it with someone, because you're exactly right. As much as I hate to say it, I do get in a rhythm, and I get to the point where it's like, okay, if this happens, I need to do this, this, and this. So, when this happens, I need to do this. Or, hey, man, I still got 8 sponsor reads that I got to knock out at least once. And, oh, man, we're already in the last heat race. So I know I'm running out of time. But, like, this upcoming weekend, the Port Royal, I'll announce with Earl Hoon Jr. And Earl's very good about knowing that, hey, man, he's got to get through his reads. And Earl knows me pretty well. So I can get through them. Or when I go to Knoxville, Tony Bachhoven knows that, hey, this has to happen. But I don't really run into too many problems. But you're exactly right. It does sometimes throw you for a whirl and think, oh man, hold on, I got to get this done. So let me pull this paper up. But it's not bad. Honestly, I enjoy working with other guys because I feel like it helps the broadcast. I mean, if they can fill in some of their local knowledge, because a guy like the local guy, he's at that racetrack every night, where I'm only there sometimes one night a year. So he can fill in some gaps. And I love to give the local guys an opportunity to be able to talk about the racetrack and some of the upcoming events that they may have to promote their racetrack, because the All Stars, I mean, we get a sanction fee and the ticketing isn't on our end. So if the place is packed, we're getting the same thing as if one person shows up. So we want their events to be successful as possible. And we also want them to be able to be successful the rest of the year so we can come back and they can stay open. So we want everyone to have a big successful night. And I feel like that kind of gives them a little bit of an opportunity to promote their racetrack and their events to a bigger audience that they normally wouldn't get.
That makes sense, and it's good to get that insight kind of on how some of the things in the back end kind of work. One of the next topics to go into is you actually have your own podcast, Anderson 410, that gets posted to Flow Racing. Kind of what was maybe the decision to have your own podcast and kind of get that chance to? I know you probably already interact with the drivers a ton. You're always chatting with them throughout the night, but then maybe during the week, kind of get that extra content of if they had a stellar weekend or maybe they didn't have such a great weekend, but just get that chance to talk to them.
Yeah, I just finished my recording the episode just about 20 minutes ago with Zeb Wise. But that whole Anderson 410 deal, I wasn't really sure if I really wanted to do a podcast. And I was like, there's a lot of them out there. I don't need to be out there. Like, there's other guys like you guys that do a great job, that I don't want to muddy the water. But so the pandemic hit last year, and Michael Rigsby, that runs Flow Racing and owns Dirt on Dirty, is the VP of Flow Racing. Michael's been one of my mentors and one of those guys I've always been able to lean on. Has been huge for my career. Called me and like, hey man, we need content on Flow. Like, there is no racing going on right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Can you do a show? Like, can we come up with something? So I got on several conference calls with the folks at Flow. They came up with this Anderson 410 idea. They're like, are you okay with Anderson 410? Do you like it? Do you want to do it? And like, yeah, I don't mind doing it. And now I think today was episode 37 or 38. So we try to do one a week, but obviously, we get busy. So like June is really, really busy for the All Stars. So not sure how many I'm going to get to do, but that's what prompted it, was this pandemic and just trying to get content for all the Flow Racing subscribers, so they're not sitting there thinking, man, I paid $150. I realize we're in the content or in a pandemic, but what am I paying for? So that's where that came from, and we've just kind of kept going with it. Here we are. I think the first episode was April 15th of last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention too, like with the Flow thing, the 150, I think it's great because we get to hear you every night with the All Stars, but your All Access or the All Access stuff, and then the Anderson 410 stuff is a great watch on Flow Racing.
Yeah, they do so good with the behind the scenes pieces. And I was just on a conference call with them last week as we were trying to outline some of the stuff we want to do for Ohio Sprint Speed Week. And, that's only 2.5 weeks away. But there's some cool stuff playing there. And that's really what our big focus is. And I say our at Flow, I mean, Flow's our partner, but I work alongside Flow pretty much every day. And that's our big focus, is just trying to get those extra pieces and give guys that maybe don't get a bunch of attention, a little bit of attention, get them on a podcast or get them on a special interview after the races, or let's go all access with them for a night and let the fans see. I love those all access pieces. Like, I'm a nerd. I'll admit it. I love getting to see, man, what's Tanner Holmes doing on race night? What are they doing? I don't see it. So when he rolls off the racetrack, what's he talk about when he goes back to the trailer? What's their process? How do they work? I mean, I'm a sports guy, so when they do all access with baseball team or the football team, or I will put out some all access stuff. Like, I consume it. I can't get enough of it. But that's really Flo's focus, Bennett, is to really get stuff that really isn't captured anywhere else. And
Yeah, and I think maybe Flo needs to do an all access on you to kind of see what's going on up in
That'd be cool.
in the announcers booth. One of the things you mentioned, Ohio Speed Week, that's coming up. We're going to get into that. But before we talk about what's next for the All-Stars to kind of wrap up the podcast, we had 2 fan questions that were sent in. The first one being, out of all the years that you've announced, do you just remember like one of the races maybe that was just the most thrilling, where you're on the edge of your seat and just it clearly sticks out kind of in your mind?
a couple of them I can name. Sammy at the Knoxville Nationals in 2010, when he was chasing his Knoxville Nationals and got upside down coming to the white flag. I remember calling the race with Dave Reef because Tony was working Tony was working the television broadcast for Speed, and Dave and Toby Cruz and everyone there were. I remember thinking, like, there's 2 to go and looking over like, man, we're gonna call Sammy Swindell winning the Knoxville Nationals for the first time since 1983. Holy cow! And that was it, coming to the white, coming to the 2 to go, and then as he's coming off a 4, 3/4 of a lap later, he gets upside down. That one sticks out. But I think my all-time favorite, the one that sticks out the most to me, was 2011 Indiana Midget Week. It was Brian Clausen, Kyle Larson, and Brad Kuhn at Putnamville, Lincoln Park Speedway, just having a war. I mean, sliding each other. Brian went into turn 3, coming to the checkered flag in 3rd place, and ripped the top and won off the high side past Larson and Kuhn in the final corner for the win. And that one sticks out to me. That's probably my favorite race I've ever called.
That's cool.
Wow. The second fan question that we have, and I'm sure you probably have, you talked about having My Race Pass and some cool software and stuff to help you out. But throughout the night, the All-Stars have so many sponsors and marketing partners that you're always going through. Is it hard to remember everything to make sure you get it in, or do you have some sort of checklist throughout the night, when to say everything?
I have a Microsoft Word document, basically. At the beginning of the year, I work with all our partners and say, hey, this is what I have for you guys. What do you want to change? So I just enter it in a Word document. And basically, it's as simple as scrolling up and down on the Word document. Where it gets difficult is trying to remember, okay, I'm at this read, and then I have to scroll back up to the top for my heat race reads. And then, remember, okay, I left off here, so I scroll back down. But it's really not complex. It's more so me just putting that mental check mark on things and remembering where I'm at. I used to kind of hop skipping all over the place, and then I was thinking, oh, shoot, I didn't do my Hunt Brothers pizza read tonight because I'm an idiot. So now I just go in order, and that's how I do it.
Yeah, I think I know now because I watch all the All-Star events. Right as Corey goes out for qualifying, if it's after qualifying, you hit straight to the, you may know the routine name, but do you know, it's classic.
Yep, I'm sure you're not the only one. I try to move my Race Redeem Foundation read around where Corey is in the program, just because it fits and it mentions the 26 car. So then if it's a first time watcher or a new fan, I can point it out and say, hey, there's the 26 car in turn 3. And usually Jeff Converse, our cameraman, does a great job of finding Corey on the racetrack wherever he is and focusing the camera on him.
That's very interesting. So a couple of minutes ago, you talked about Ohio Speed Week, kind of for what's next for the All-Stars. That is the next big event. You guys have, this weekend in Pennsylvania, and then I think you have a couple of nights kind of maybe around Illinois area. So Ohio Speed Week, that is kind of a crucial point for a lot of the full-time teams. So many races in a row, a lot of points kind of end up being on the line. Can you just talk about the uniqueness of that Speed Week and also all the different tracks that Ohio has that all in a way are similar, but they're just really tough to tame?
It's a bear, I'll tell you that much. I remember the first year we did it, we raced 9 out of 9 nights. Or no, that was year 2. First year we got 7 out of 9. We rained out the last 2. Year 2 we got 9 out of 9, and then this year we're running 8 nights in 9 days, and there's a lot of politics that go into it. I mean, it's not the ideal perfect schedule of just kind of going to a schedule. Sometimes we have to crisscross and move around, and that's simply because of politics. Unfortunately, that's a big part in our sport. Everyone wants a Saturday night or a Friday night and unfortunately, there's only so many Fridays and Saturdays that land in our Ohio Sprint Speed Week schedule. But the good thing is it gets great support from our great race fans that it truly is a must-see event that people come in from all over, and we got a ton of campers so our crowds are pretty good, but it's a lot. I mean, you're living in a hotel for 10 straight days and you're trying to get notes done and I'm trying to keep the website updated and trying to keep our partners updated on where we're going, and I send our partners emails every week on if they have some pictures, here's some pictures and here's what's happening with our series, because they spend a lot of money with us, and I feel that they deserve to know what's going on. So that gets hectic and but it's a blast at the same time, and it's our favorite week and a half of the year because we see so many race teams from all over, and every night there's 45 to 55 race cars from literally all over the world. And I know a couple people from Australia are planning to get over here in the next week or two. They went through those hurdles to get here. But it's fun, and I feel like Flow Racing, our partnership with Flow, and then before that we were with Speed Shift and the Cushion, and that's really expanded Ohio Sprint Speed Week because you guys out on the West Coast can tune in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're getting ready to go heat racing and watch. And people in Australia can wake up they're watching us at Fremont eating breakfast on a Monday morning. So that's really cool, but it's been neat to watch that grow, and it's really our focus on how we can continue to grow that. And I just started today. We got our Speed Week logo worked out and getting that approved by Cometic and Hercules Tire and getting the trophies worked out and checks. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that it's like you don't realize, holy cow, we're 3 weeks away from really, as you said, the most grueling week of the year. And that really dictates a lot in our point standings too. It's like when we get through Speed Week, you can kind of have an idea of, okay, these are the guys that are going to be contending for our championship. This guy may not have a good Speed Week, and he's got a big hole to dig out of in not a lot of time.
Yep.
Yeah, that is the All-Star schedule is definitely about to get busy, and you guys are going to be doing some traveling. Our last question, after Ohio Speed Week, I know you guys have some bigger shows. What are some of the events you guys are looking forward to getting to as you kind of now look towards the end of the season, even though there is still so much racing left?
Yeah, we take a week and a half or 2 weekends off after Speed Week, so that lands with the Jackson Nationals and the big Huset's race that we're going to allow our teams to go to. We want them to be able to run big shows, and hopefully they run well because that looks great for the series when they do. And then off 4th of July weekend, and then we pick back right up, and it's like big events after big event. We got the Lou Blaney Memorial, which is always a big event. We raise a lot of money for the Alzheimer's Association, which is really special to me. I lost my grandmother in 1999 to Alzheimer's, so that's pretty cool for me that we have an event tied to our schedule where we can help promote raising money for the Alzheimer's Association. And the Justin Sanders Salute to Troops race is right there as well, which is cool because they bring some veterans out, and we get a lot of people that served our country out at those events. And then you're right. It's like we have our Thunder Through the Plains, which is 7 races in 9 nights that ends at Knoxville, which is cool because my friends and family can come out to that. My high school buddies come down. My parents come out, my aunts and uncles. And then we're off for nationals. And then really when we get back in August, that's when it's like every week is a big event. And that is a blast. I mean, all kind of leads to the Tusky 50, and then right after the Tusky 50 we have the Dirt Classic, which is 20 grand to win, and then 4 Crown, and then we're off, and then we end with 10 grand to win in Fremont. So it's like, man, you're right, business is picking up, and that's what we get paid to do, and I love it. I mean, the beginning of the year was maybe a little not frustrating, but it was like we raced a week, then we're off a week, raced a week, off a week for the first 6 weeks of the season. So it's hard to get in that rhythm of doing things. I'm sure you guys can relate as racers that it's tough to get in a rhythm when you're not in a rhythm.
Yeah. 100%. Well, Blake, thank you so much for joining us today on our schedule. Even though we're out here on the West Coast, we do plan on running with the All-Stars, I think right there at the end of July. So awesome. We look forward to seeing you out there. Yeah. And like I said, thank you for joining us on the show. It was great to hear some insight on the All-Star Circuit of Champions Series.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoy poking around on the YouTube channel and seeing some of the cool behind-the-scenes stuff you do, with whether it was your sister hopping in the sprint car for the first time. That was pretty cool to watch that video, to watch her improve, and I really got a kick out of that one. So I'm excited that we'll get to have you guys with us here in a month and a half, and hopefully you guys have some good racing out on the West Coast until then, and we'll see you at the end of July.
So that was definitely one of our best interviews yet. Obviously, Blake being an announcer, he was a phenomenal speaker and had some great stories and just insight on his job, as the voice of the All-Stars.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of cool to me. It's almost like, it's like going to the NASCAR track and you meet one of your favorite drivers. It's almost the same thing for me, is because I'm a big fan of the All-Star Series. And so you hear this voice every time, but you don't really see Blake unless it's the dash redraw or the interviews, after the races.
Yeah.
But it's always cool to talk to him and, get to hear these people's stories off of just what you hear during a regular race night. And he's a really awesome guy, so I can't wait to actually meet him in person, because I've talked to him a few times, like we said, on the pit walks and whatnot, and he does just a phenomenal job.
Yeah, and we were able to answer some specific questions that even just, we had, some of the fans had sent in stuff for us to specifically ask Blake, but, even down to little things like, how do you remember all the sponsors, or how do you, get all the information on the drivers each night and get in this rhythm, just like how us race car drivers get in the rhythm behind the wheel. He is able to do that behind the mic. So like we said, we are super pumped up to get to see Blake this week. We didn't tell him we were running Ohio Speed Week.
It was a surprise.
Because like I said in my vlog, I didn't want to tell anyone ahead of time, because, the word gets out and then, all these people maybe are expecting us to go, and you just never want to have something happen. We tell Blake and then all of a sudden we're not able to go, and it just kind of turns into a mess. So, I'm sure, he was going to be surprised, but he knew he was going to see us at least at the end of July when we had some all-star races planned kind of down in the Midwest. So we're going to get to see him a little bit early, and then we will also see the All-Stars and the whole series a little bit later into 2021.
Oh, I was going to actually say too, is I don't think people really understand how, I think announcers are so underrated, because as we were listening to him announce the All-Stars when they ran the IRA combo races, and I was just thinking, and Tanner was saying the same thing, it's like, how do you remember each and every one of those things? And he talks about this notebook of sponsors and whatnot.
And how much time that probably takes to gather that information.
Just think about this real quick, because, we've been around the Red Bluff Outlaws for years, right? So I feel confident I could announce, probably 90% of the people. But the other 10%, I'm thinking to myself, it's like, how do you even know to a quick reaction when cars are racing if you don't know that person regularly and they just come to race once or twice, just to remember everything about that driver? And I think it's really impressive.
Yeah, I think the names are kind of the easier part, but it's more like the sponsors and being able to pop that stuff off.
Their wins in their career.
The accomplishments. And it gets harder the smaller the series is, I feel like, because, the drivers aren't as well known. Of course, if someone like Sammy Swindell shows up, you kind of remember some of his big races, or it's easy to get that information. But other drivers, even like us out here on the West Coast, stuff is not as well documented besides our YouTube videos and stuff. But if you were just to look up results on a guy that just races out here, it's very, very difficult. And as of recently, it's much easier because we have things like My Race Pass and a couple other live timing things that kind of track our results. But other than that, it is very, very difficult. Another thing to bring up is I get tired after talking. We've shot some live streams and even podcasts. After an hour and a half of consistently speaking, there's something that just wears me out about that. So the fact that, hot laps will start at 5 or 5:30 and, the race night's going a whole 4 or 5, 6 hours. And he's always, up there standing up and having to have that same level of intensity and excitement. That's got to be something that, in a way, I don't know if train's the best word, but you train yourself for that, and you get really good at that. And I use the word rhythm, you have to get in your rhythm.
And another thing I think a lot of people forget too is how many races the All-Stars have, right? It's pretty impressive to me that he keeps it always entertaining as an announcer, and it's never repetitive. If you really think about it, so many races, and, they always have their season regulars, the same sponsors you're going to announce each time. He has a schedule that he announces on, but it's never repetitive to the point where it's okay, this is just over and over, because, it kind of relates. I've been to pro rodeos where all the announcers do is just talk about the sponsors every intermission, and it's so repetitive and annoying where, Blake he chops it up a little bit, and I think that's pretty cool. I know there is one that me and you really like. It's the Race for Dean Foundation, and I always know when that one's coming out because after Corey qualifies and whatnot. But other than that, he does a really good job of keeping it unique at each track every time.
Yeah, and if there's anybody, watching the podcast or a fan of Blake Anderson, and, you almost want to aspire to be in that spot, he would be a great mentor and someone I think you could reach out to. And, if you're trying to announce at your local racetrack or announce announce even something non-racing related, you need advice, like I think he's a good guy that you could reach out to and he would respond and, give you some advice if that's the pathway you want to go down. So Blake Anderson, definitely one of the best guests we've had, and we look forward to kind of keeping in touch with them throughout the 2021 season. I think the next segment, before we kind of wrap up this podcast and get some sleep before we head to Ohio, we got to talk about the Southern Oregon Speedway this last weekend. We ran there. It was their first sprint car race in over 500 days. This was their second race of the season, so their schedule got pushed back because, the place was technically abandoned in February, and then I think, around March, early April is when, the new management got the contract and the whole process went down of who could acquire the racetrack, because the county owns the track and they're kind of, I guess, like leasing it as like a promoter. It's not like someone outright bought it and now owns it. So it's just new management, new promoters, and there was a big group of them. So anyway, they got their schedule finalized. They got all the events, but you got to remember it's very difficult because, they're 3 or 4 months behind every track. So they're trying to schedule races when everyone else already has their schedule and people are kind of like committed to those tracks. So they're taking a huge risk. And at the same time, getting this racetrack, they put so much money into the facility. But the night started off, we got going pretty early with 4 divisions. I think we had the pro stocks there. We had our sprint cars, dwarf cars, and what was it, B-mods? Some sort of modified.
It was a mod,
So we had another modified division. So 4 classes, which I thought was going to be perfect, and it was kind of the return of the sprint cars. And really, we just want to talk about, I guess, starting off with the night. We swept the night in the sprint car division. Quick Time won the heat race, won the trophy dash, and won the A-main event.
I believe you were fastest in hot laps too. So
yeah,
full sweep.
Well, somehow, because of the new configuration of the racetrack, we hold the track record. So we're stoked about that for 1 week. But anyway, we qualified. We were able to sweep the night. And I guess with their new format, it's very beneficial to a guy that qualifies good, which I'm usually not the best qualifier, but we laid down a good lap, and then it put us on the pole of our heat race, on the pole of the trophy dash, and then in the A-main event, they either drew a 0 or an 8 pill. So the worst I was going to start is 8th, and the best I would start was on the pole, and there was no in between. It was either a 0 or an 8 because of where I lined up, and we ended up getting the 0. A kid, I think he picked the right hand from the announcer. They did something in the infield, but we ended up starting on the pole, and it was rubber for 20 or 25 laps. I'm not sure. I think they cut the race a little bit short.
It was 25 laps, and then there was a caution, and it was straight rubber. So they just cut it by 20 laps, and it was pretty late as well.
Yeah, it was very late. So anyway, 25 lap feature, and we ended up getting the win, and we were able to pull it in victory lane. So overall, it was a good night. We did want to talk about just a couple of things that the Southern Oregon Speedway did well, and then we also have a couple of suggestions. Before I guess we get into that, just kind of as like a disclaimer, we've never owned a racetrack, we've never done track prep or anything. So like we commend the Southern Oregon Speedway. Like Bennett was saying, we want to see the place succeed more than anyone else. So this is not like criticism, like in that sense. It's just small suggestions that we see from our point of view, which, from their point of view, there's maybe a certain reason why they did things the way they did, which that is completely fine. So starting off, I think the facility, one of the things they've done great,
cool.
They have dumped so much money into this place, and like it is so cool to roll up and see just a top-notch facility. The pits are phenomenal. Very, very clean cut. There's plenty of places to park, and they have it organized where like sprint cars are down here. All the other classes are kind of, in different spots. So it's easy for sprint cars to get in and out of the pits, because obviously it's no secret. Sprint cars, when they're rolling through, we can't just necessarily stop. But also on that note, it's a cold pit for sprint cars. So that means as we roll off the racetrack, we pull it out of gear, and our quad comes and gets us and then pushes us back to our trailer, which is a very big safety feature, because, there's been multiple tracks across the country where there's been incidents in the pits because sprint cars can't stop. And there's a lot of people that come to the races that don't know that. Trust me, there's been every week it gets me so, that's one of my biggest pet peeves is people will walk right in front of sprint cars at Cottage Grove like we can stop and we can't get it. I don't get it.
One of the things too is it's like a flood. So everyone floods to the track to watch the sprint cars, and then right as they're done, they flood out. And even worse is like when you're going to like race some of the 360 stuff down to Larry, like the way you guys come off right when you're done, everybody have all the quads parked there and they just bolt out. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, some tracks are, better than others. Another one to note, I said Cottage Grove. Like Cottage Grove's a very small and tight pit area, and there will just be like people walking around with their kids right in front of the cars. Like I said, like we can stop. and it's so dangerous, and it makes it tough on the drivers because obviously, like if something happens, like we're gonna feel horrible, but there's almost nothing we can do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So I'm glad that they decided to make it a cold pit to where you have to pull it out of gear, and it just it takes a little worry off the drivers, and it's just good for everyone. So that was one of the things. Another one was the concessions. I didn't get a chance to go up top as much, but they now have Sweet Tea Express, which Sweet Tea Express is a local restaurant here in town. They're taking over the concessions for one half. They also have another bento place, which is right down the street from the studio. Both of them are phenomenal.
Really good food.
Like really, really good food. And then another thing that they've, done great on these first 2 weeks, sold out crowds. Like unbelievable how many people were there to start the night. I've never seen that many people at the Southern Oregon Speedway before.
Absolutely. And I think like we were talking is like, it was just really cool to be in that like experience of a absolute sold out crowd.
In a local track.
A local track as well. I mean, this is your hometown track. This track's only 2.5 hours away from me. So like we said, we really want this place to prosper. And there's nothing, I think, cooler than winning a race or racing in front of a huge crowd.
Yeah, it especially after the year we had in 2020 where like we were pretty much going to the races and there wasn't any fans at all. So you win, but you kind of get out and it's just a ghost town. It's like, who did we just win in front of besides the, maybe a couple hundred people that are watching on the pay-per-view. One of the last things the Speedway has done great at, and I want to just compliment the announcer. I believe his name's Cameron. He's from the local news station, but man, I don't think he had a whole lot of experience announcing races, but so far 2 events, you can tell his questions aren't just like basic questions. Like the interviewing stuff is good. He's starting to, he's paying attention during the races and, he's really starting to figure out his stuff. So I wanted to compliment him. But so that's kind of a lot of the great things we've noticed. Oh, go ahead.
One more thing too is all the staff was great. Like they're very accommodating to you as well because like we said, we had your car up front or up top with your merchandise booth and they were very accommodating, offering you a pit cart to go back and forth. And they're just really nice people. And when you go to a track, I think that's something that's like, I think it's pretty important.
Oh, it's so important. When they come up and they say, hey, thank you so much for doing this. Like, we appreciate it. And like, also, we're super grateful that they allowed us, they free of charge to, bring our car up there. We brought the 410 up there for show. It sat right there when we walked in. We had a t-shirt booth, which we saw so much support from local fans, people that weren't even maybe fans of the vlogs, that, needed a sweater because it was really cold or a hat, or they just, they wanted to support someone. So we appreciate that they let us, it was a little extra work for us, but like I said, set up a t-shirt booth, had a car on display, and that's something I think now we want to do at least once a year at the Speedway, like kind of for our own thing, as we're able to, get to race in front of our local fans and sponsors, which we don't always get the chance to do. So like we said, we want to see the Southern Oregon Speedway succeed. A couple suggestions that we just kind of noticed throughout the night that maybe like if there's ways they could tweak, I think it would just make the program run a little bit smoother. One of the main ones was the pit gates, and I think that part of it was they did not intend for this many people. They haven't really expected the support the Speedways got, but they opened the pit gates at like 4 p.m. For pit passes, which means like people were in the pits, but everyone had to come out of the pits. They did like a sweep, which I get because, they're trying to make sure no one's sneaking in. Totally understandable. But they, sweep the pits, and that only gave them about an hour and a half until the scheduled pit meeting time to get everyone banded. And I mean, I wish I had a video of how long the line was. It
did not die down at least until 6:30, 7 o'clock. Like the line was constant.
Yeah. So they had to push back the starting time and whatnot. So I guess like, just because of most racetracks we go to, they don't usually, open that late. So if there's a way they could open, maybe at 2 or 1 o'clock, and then just as people roll in, they're able to get their pit pass. That seems like what a lot of racetracks do. I think it kind of just makes the show smoother. So, especially as it gets hotter and hotter, the racers aren't sitting out there waiting for their band.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. And especially at a track where it's like everyone's kind of showing up that day. Maybe just, start it right off, get your band and you're in. Whereas like, I understand if we got there at like, I don't know, 1 a.m. and we're sleeping there and then we park and then of course they're going to sweep the pits because of all the people that show up overnight. But I think it would be beneficial to start it a little bit early.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the things we noticed. I think that would just kind of help speed up the show, and then they won't have to push back the start time because a lot of fans had, well like I said, that hold just kind of screwed up the process a little bit, which that just happens. It's their second race. The next thing that we kind of saw that maybe suggested, and this is going to just come with time as well, but just working on kind of keeping the show smooth.
Yeah.
A couple things were unexpected that they can't really, do anything about, like the pro stocks. I think they had a couple wrecks and hot laps, which which the track was just really, really slick. And I think they maybe weren't expecting that. And so I think at one point, they had a couple pro stocks hooked up and the
cable snapped.
The cable snapped.
Yeah.
So that, added a little bit of time. So like as the officials and stuff kind of train themselves and learn, that's going to go faster, but also like kind of the communication of it.
Yeah.
I think the My Race Pass, it's really hard to, kind of figure out for racetracks, and also just technology. Technology is great until it fails you, and so
100%.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's also very beneficial that each designated official has a radio, and they're able to communicate with other officials and the tower.
Yeah, because it seemed like there was a lot of people in the tower, but they weren't able to have maybe as many people in the pit area. So, like, for example, what happened was we had the sprint cars, and we drew a pill when we got in to line up.
Yeah.
Well, what ended up happening is there was no sprint car lineup, and we had no one to go and talk to about it. Like, we kept going over there, and we were up next for qualifying, and, cars just started lining up, and we were all just going to go out whenever we wanted to, because they didn't have a lineup for us. And then like last minute, as they're literally getting ready to push off the first group, they posted lineups. So it just kind of threw everything for a frenzy, which, like I said, that stuff's just going to happen. You're never going to have a perfect night at the dirt track, but the kind of the communication and like, getting everyone on the same page as far as that went.
Well, also too, when you finished up your heat race, I believe it was, you had, acquired some damage, and me and Carly were like, do we come out and get you after the heat races? Because we were never told if we were allowed to. But you also asked too, you saw the damage, if you could be pushed off, but the official didn't have any communication and didn't know if they were allowed to cross the track at the time.
Yeah, because I had kind of folded my drag link, and I was like, hey, I had just gotten, over the scales, and I was like, hey, can someone push me off so we can get this fixed? Which, granted, we had a lot of time, but I knew, it was going to be better the faster we could get it fixed. And then I guess kind of along with like the speed of the show, as each race kind of came on the track, they just took quite a few laps to get everyone lined up, which partly that's on the drivers. Like the drivers got to get lined up. But then I think they were kind of waiting to announce the whole field, which that just kind of slowed down the show. And obviously we were already running late. So that's just another one of those things that they're going to get faster with as time goes. And then the last one, this was the more obvious, but the track conditions. The track did kind of eat up tires this weekend. And I think part of it was they had watered it. It sounded like a lot throughout the week, but they just weren't able to get moisture down in the track. And I kind of wonder, the material at Southern Oregon just seems different. Not that it's like bad material, but like when we go to Cottage Grove or some of these other tracks, maybe it's easier to get the water down deeper in it versus Southern Oregon. I'm not 100% sure what their track prep looked like. But, they tried to spray some water on it throughout the night, but obviously by then the surface was just so hard that, the rubber, the rubber and the abrasive top of the surface was just going to kind of keep coming back no matter what they did, unless, they had, which I'm not sure if they did, if they had equipment to go out there and really rip it up and then rewater it.
Well, I think one thing that would very much help with that is I did notice this in like the hot laps prior, there was almost like way too many laps for each class or each session that went out. And I think some sessions were, maybe a little bit longer than other, but I think, a solid 3 to 4 laps.
Yeah, qualifying 3 to 4 laps.
Qualifying 3 to 4 laps. And if you're going to do a hot lap session, maybe, 4 to 5 laps, because some of them were like, they're going on pretty long. And I think that really just took the track out fairly quick.
Yeah, I think our qualifying was like upwards of 8. And I know when we were watching the dwarfs and so 8 laps for like qualifying or hot laps, it's just, unless the track's greasy, which it wasn't. So like I said, that's just little things they're going to figure out, but the track conditions obviously ate up our tires, which just makes it tough. Hoosiers aren't cheap. And especially for the sprint car guys, once rubber comes in, it starts to kind of turn into single file racing. And for some of the other divisions, it wasn't too bad. Like the dwarf cars actually had a pretty good show.
Yeah, the dwarf cars weren't terrible actually, and I think that just becomes with the size. And I think the track was like, you could run the one lane down and then another like almost lane and a half above. And the sprint cars and the mods were doing that, but for the dwarf cars, that's almost perfect. It's 2-lane racing. So there's a lot of utilization of the very bottom, and then you could almost diamond line it, catch some, just barely a little bit of moisture off the bottom. And I think it was between Josh King, Brock Peters, Calvin Morton was rolling through the field, and also Devin LaHorde. So it was actually a lot of great racing in the dwarf cars. I just think, maybe a little touch up would be some of the officiating and the calls. Just some of them didn't quite make sense. Like, this, and you could probably talk on this, is like on the first lap, I think it was Devin accidentally got into someone and he wrecked or spun along with 2 other cars. Well, he was sent to the back, but the 2 other cars that spun and stalled got to keep their spot. And, normally racing, like with outlaw carts or sprint cars, if you spin, I'm sorry, but you go the back. I mean, it's tough luck. That's just how it works. So
100%.
I just don't think I agree with that. But other than that, the dwarf cars were racing great.
So I think we can both agree now with the new management at the Southern Oregon Speedway, it's going to be a top-tier racetrack here just throughout the season. Once they start kind of finding their groove, little things, track prep, start times, how everything works so the system just clicks, they're going to be at the top of the Pacific Northwest, and I can't wait to see the future of the Speedway as it succeeds through the coming seasons. But that's going to kind of wrap up episode number 22 here. We had a fun weekend, and we have a lot more fun coming up here with 8 races in 9 days for Ohio Speed Week.
Yeah, all I can really say, like you said, Southern Oregon Speedway, all I see is huge potential. So I'm really excited for it. Lots
and lots of potential. So if you guys have the chance, support the local Southern Oregon Speedway. If you're here in the southern part of the state, they need your support. Man, the turnouts have been great concessions. The fan experience is there. The racing's going to get better and better, and we're hoping to, make a couple more runs out there as our schedule allows.
Same here, too. So.
Bennett's going to be out there with the dwarf car, so you're going to have to watch some factory SBR racing. Anyway, that's going to wrap up episode number 22. As usual, you guys can listen here every single Wednesday on the Off the Track YouTube channel. It's also available on all of the audio platforms, Spotify and Apple Podcast. We're going to go get some sleep because we got to return here in about 6 or 7 hours to get in the RV and start heading 36 hours east. Wish us luck. It's going to be a fun trip. Can't wait to meet you all. And hopefully, we have some good results and can, complete our goals each night.
It's going to be fun.
See you guys all in episode number 23 next Wednesday. We're signing off for now.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are watching Off the Track, and it is time to drop the hammer.